Came across a disturbing case, um, as reported by let me just get the publication here, the Liverpool Echo, I believe it is. And it's a report about a young woman who was killed by her violent boyfriend in Halifax town centre last year. And this is the conclusion of the trial. It's quite a lengthy report, so I'm not going to read it all out, but to give you the gist of this, the defendant, Lloyd Birkby, threw a phone at the victim, his 26-year-old girlfriend, Levi Ogden. She's a mother of two. He threw the phone at her throat with such a force that it actually caused her brain damage. Um, and when I read more of this case, you'll see why it's particularly shocking. Um, Yeah, it says the distance was 6 feet to 8 feet away when Birkby threw the phone with as much force as he could muster. He said, this is in the court proceedings, I should say, at Leeds Crown Court. David Enoch QC prosecuting said the altercation on November the 3rd last year developed between the defendant and Miss Ogden, who was with her friend Courtney Bland. Miss Enoch said Birkby walked away but then returned in a clearly angry frame of mind. After kicking a passing taxi, he picked up a phone which was lying on the ground. Mr. Enoch said Miss Ogden was about 6 feet to 8 feet away when Birkby threw the phone with as much force as he could muster. He said Miss Ogden staggered a few seconds and then collapsed in a heap on the floor. The prosecutor said Birkby assaulted Miss Bland and continued to act aggressively towards two street angels. This is a kind of community initiative, I think. Calm down violent drunks. I don't know much about them, but that's what I understand it is. Obviously, this was before the lockdown. Who came to help, and paramedics and police who arrived at the scene. He said the force of the blow, plus the violent twisting of Miss Ogden's neck, caused the bleeding in her brain. Mr. Enoch described the situation as a tragic, violent incident. Stephen Wood, defending, told the court it was a highly unusual case. He said it could not have been reasonably foreseen that Birkby's actions would result in his partner's death, and he claims that his client had a mental age of 11 years and 5 months. That's what he claims. I'd like to see if that was backed up by an actual medical report. Um, what's striking about this case is that the police had already been called to 20 disturbances at the address in Elland in West Yorkshire. That's I believe it's a town outside Leeds. Um, Now, what did this thug get for taking a young woman's life after a history of violence? 5 years. 5 years for this. Um, Judge Geoffrey Marson QC, who's useless, um, told told Birkby, "You will have to carry with you the knowledge that you've deprived the children of their mother, and it will no doubt affect them throughout the whole of their lives." This was a 26-year-old woman. Birkby's 27. Um, Although the judge was in court, both barristers appeared via Skype and journalists also followed the proceedings remotely. This is obviously now. This is what really gets me. This guy had a history of domestic violence against the victim, serving a number of prison sentences for battery, and with the police being called to their home around 20 times. Now, this claim of him having a mental age of 11, if he served prison time, um, I think that would have been a mitigating factor. So I really think that is an excuse. I really find it hard to believe that he would have been in a relationship um, of this sort. I just think it just strikes me as very questionable line of defense. I mean, the report doesn't say anything about um, doctors' reports or anything being issued. And I really think that the domestic violence should have been aggravating factor. When judges issue sentences, there's aggravating and mitigating factors. So, for example, a mitigating factor would be if the victim provoked the defendant. But an aggravating factor would be, for example, a history of violence, which this guy clearly has. 5 years, and he'll be out in less. That's what's so disgusting about it. Detective Inspector Natalie Dawson of West Yorkshire Police, this bit gets me as well, said, "This case is a tragic reminder to all of what can happen when excessive force is used to try to resolve a situation. Levi's death was completely unnecessary. It demonstrates the perils of people resorting to violence. We welcome today's sentence and hope it could bring Levi's family some closure, knowing the man who caused her death is now behind bars." When police make these ridiculous statements, I mean, if I was her father or her brother or someone else who cared about her, and I thought, is her life worth 5 years? I sure as hell wouldn't have closure. I'd be raging. Um, I just think it's another example of a pathetically useless sentence. Incidentally, this judge apparently has a bit of a reputation. There was a petition on change.org saying he's soft on paedophiles. I don't know what the background of that is, but I don't know how, in any rational sense, 5 years could be seen as an adequate sentence for taking a young woman's life. Even if he didn't intend to kill her, the history of violence should have been an aggravating factor. I think 10 to 12 years at least would have been far more appropriate. Looking at his Facebook page, it's bombarded with uh, hateful messages. I'm not surprised. Um, although there were people putting the caveat that that could jeopardize the trial, i.e., getting a fair trial and so on. But this is the outcome. 5 years. Um, all I can say is, Judge Geoffrey Marson, get into the real world. You have just issued 5 years to a violent thug who took a young woman's life. 5 meaningless years. He will be out in less. He will be out in less. So he's 27. That means he'll be out in his early 30s, which is younger than me. He'll get to live the rest of his life. This young woman has had her life taken away. Her children now have no mother. So how, in any rational way, this could be seen as justice? I don't understand why his history of violence wasn't brought in as aggravating factors. I say shame on Judge Geoffrey Marson QC. You're useless. Struck off. And it's just another damning indictment of our weak justice system. And as for this line about him having a mental age of 11, I really, really think that's dubious. I mean, are we supposed to believe that he's? If that's the case, I think it would have been stated in the report that there would have been some sort of medical report or something. And for me, a sort of red flag there is the fact he previously served prison sentences. Now, unless that was in young offenders institutes, if that really was the case that he had severe learning difficulties, he would have been put in some sort of psychiatric hospital, like Broadmoor or something. I don't think he would have been jailed. So I really question that as a line of defense without knowing every aspect of the case. But I'm just disgusted that it's 5 years. 5 years. So let's just close with this. I really, really believe we need to have a criminal justice revolution in this country where weak judges are really held to account. I don't really accept the line that their hands are tied by sentencing guidelines. Whilst I think the Sentencing Council of England and Wales has a lot to answer for, I think it's Australia where they actually have minimum sentencing. Minimum sentencing. So there is a lower limit where judges cannot actually issue weak sentences. Um, they cannot issue something lesser than that. So I would say for this sort of case, i.e., manslaughter, and it was manslaughter as opposed to murder if he didn't intend to kill her, i.e., it was a violent assault. The fact there was an aggravating factor there, I would say they should have got a minimum of 10 years. 5 years is really not worth it. 10 years, at least, would have been a bit more appropriate. It's just abhorrent.